We're
And
live.
we're live.
All right. Yay. We're getting closer.
Yeah,
Getting closer. I'm excited for you.
me
I'm
too.
I'm excited for you because I know how much has happened in your sort of journey and your
Yeah,
transformation and all of the like the stuff that you have started to learn about yourself and about honing in on what this is and how it aligns with what you want. So I'm excited for that part of it. But
yeah.
people see like the tip of the iceberg, right? And
Mhm.
when we finally go live, it's going to be really exciting. Um, One of the things that came up this week, which I thought was super interesting, and that I know has been a real part of your sort of journey in your past, was this narrative that you were telling around how you got to where you are.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you used in order to get to where you are was like a strategy of micro experiments. And
Mhm.
I thought this was super interesting because what it does is it actually is really relevant to whether you're going through your career shift or whether you're actually building a business or whatever it is that you're doing in your life.
Yeah.
We think that we need to have it all figured out before we do anything. We think we have to make these big momentous, this is the first step. But what you actually did, just sort of intuitively, when you were trying to figure out your own path as an SLP, was you tried all these different directions, right? You kind of like did these little micro experiments and you tried here, you tried there. And that is what we're all doing on a regular basis. And I think we talk ourselves out of it and we try to tell ourselves that that's not the way we're supposed to do it. But actually, that's the most effective way to get from where you are to where you want to be. So I want to hear more about your experience in building those kind of micro experience experiments and what how that helped you get where you wanted to go faster, sooner, more accurately. Like how did that happen?
So the whole purpose behind it, with which I, as you said, was doing intuitively without realizing it, there's actually three things. So there's number one, figuring out what direction you want to go in your career and seeing, because sometimes you really don't know what you're going to like until you try it. There's like some TED talk out there. it some smart person said one time, don't follow your passion, let your passion follow you. So of course you have your interests, you have your things that are meaningful to you based on your past experiences, but sometimes we really don't know how much we are going to like or dislike something until we try it. So that's the first part of it, which is sort of the main part of it. But then there's other things that it does for you as well. The second thing is that many times when you want to make a leap, a lot of times people feel this whole catch 22 of, I don't have experience doing the thing, so I feel like I'm not qualified for it. But the only way to get experience doing the thing is to just do it. But from a job prospect perspective, sometimes it can actually be hard to get hired for something if you don't have experience doing it. And I'm using big air quotes there. So what the micro experiment can do is start to build up that portfolio of experience now in the position that you're currently in, whether it's a formal, official job that you're going to do, whether it's just starting a business like a private practice, whether it is shifting to a new setting or using your transferable skills that you learned as a clinician to something that's not clinical. I know, like, my mother-in-law is a nurse and she does some kind of like an admin type of job in more of a corporate setting using her skills that she had as a clinician. So she, again, there's all different ways that you can look at this, but that's the second thing, is that you're also building your experience and you're learning ways to sell yourself. You're building up that portfolio. And a lot of times people are doing this intuitively without realizing it, and they don't realize how much experience they actually have. But if they do it more strategically, that they can actually seek out and try to create some of these experiences, if they actually start to think about what might they want to do. And again, it's an experiment. You never know for sure. You're going on your theory of what you think you might like, and it's exploratory, but at the same time you are strategically moving towards something instead of doing it haphazardly. So that's the second thing. There's exploring your career options, building your portfolio of experience. And then finally, the other thing, which, if you're for therapists, and I think this could apply to, anybody who's doing in a role where they're being of service to other people, these things that you do as micro experiments can help you to serve the people that you're serving now at the same time. So it's really a win for everybody. When I was in the school systems, all the things that I did were things that would help me to, think about the next stage of my career, but also it was helping the students and the facility and the school, like the staff that I was currently in. So it was really helping everyone. And I think that that's really important for this particular group of people, because that's the whole point of why they decided to be therapists in the first place. So that's really the whole idea behind it. I could get into some more specific micro experiments. Some of them are things that I sort of created for myself, and some of them were more official jobs that were more short term. Some of them were even job interviews, shadowing someone. Like there's all different ways that you can approach this to kind of explore different things. And
Yeah,
I will, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, it's such a slippery slope of, there were certain things that I didn't go that direction, because some things I'm like, I hate this. Like, I legitimately hate this. When I first started working with you, I had this whole consulting setup. It's a great business model, but I hated it and I was bad at it. I worked so hard to try to get good at it. And you were finally like, just stop. You're miserable. Like, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a great model for some people. It just really did not work well for me specifically.
Yes.
So sometimes you have things where you're like, hell no. And sometimes you have things where you're trying a bunch of things and one thing sticks and the other things don't. And it's not that the other things are bad or wrong for you specifically, but maybe they just didn't stick right away. And maybe if you would have kept going that direction, you could have made it work. There are a lot of things that I did where it just didn't quite stick yet, but it could have. But I had this other thing that just was pulling me in this direction. So it, again, that experiment was the one that was working. So that's the one I leaned into, which was the online courses and mentoring SLPs online in an online business model. But I had these other things that I was doing. I was looking into higher ed positions, leadership positions, and I actually had a couple things where I could have kept going, and I probably could have been successful and happy if I would have kept going. I just chose not to do it. So sometimes you don't have this clear delineation of this isn't going to work. Sometimes it's just a choice. And you can always choose to build one bridge and then maybe come back to these other things where it was like, maybe I just didn't give it enough time. So there is this concept of, like building one bridge at a time. You can't, you can kind of experiment. And if one thing is working, you can go that way, do that, get good at it, get it kind of set up. And then you can start to explore these other things, because a lot of times people don't have just one thing that they do. Maybe they have one thing that they're focusing on building at a time, but then they can kind of eventually redirect their energy to somewhere else. Or what I thought I might want to do was do something like start the online stuff, get that built up, because that was something that would be a little more feasible schedule-wise, because I was working full-time in the schools while I was building it. And then it's like, oh, well, once I build this and that's bringing in enough income that I can leave the school, I could start taking private clients and I'd have more flexibility during the day. That's not what I chose to do, but it was an idea on the table. I could do it. I could start doing it now if I wanted to. There's other options there. And that's kind of the exploratory process we went through this summer. So again, the whole thing is that it's about curiosity and exploration and just kind of being open to things, because I will say that what I thought I was going to be doing when I graduated, what was my dream job when I was 22 is nowhere near what I'm doing now.
But that makes sense, because we don't know ourselves that well, right? Yeah. And I know that, like, this is the first thing I do with every one of my clients is we come back to who are you? What do you want? What is like, burning up for you? And sometimes it's actually really hard to find that, right? Because people can't always answer that question directly, partially because we don't get taught to focus on ourselves. We get taught to fit into some little like framework, right?
Yeah.
This is probably true for your profession, is probably true for most people's
Yeah.
professions, that this is the way things are supposed to be. And so the idea that we can ask for what we really want is so foreign to us that we don't even know what that is, right? We don't even know. We just sort of follow paths. So I would suggest that when you're in your early 20s, it's actually really, it's like a shot in the dark, right? It's a guess. And I do think you need to go through all of these. I love this idea of these micro experiments, especially when you're building a business, because this is what I do with my clients. Like we go in this direction, then we go in this direction, then we go this direction, we go, and only by experiencing. In fact, I have one client that we were very intentionally doing this with right now, where we are intentionally like asking all the questions and then going and taking action against each one of these questions until she finds what those edges are, until she finds what her business really needs to be, because she has lots of ideas. And the only way she's going to know is by doing these little experiments. They're not huge investments. They're not like going to put her out one way or the other. She's just like feeling around them. And some of them she's like, no. And then some of them she's like, this is really interesting. I could see this being something in like 6 months that I'd be interested in pursuing. And so I would be really curious to know how you chose your experiments. Like what got you to the place where you're like, oh, I'm going to try this?
Oh man, there's so many different variables. So sometimes it was just, some of them just fall in your lap and you just say yes or no. Like I really was strongly considering a career in higher ed. So with anything in education, there's a specific window of time because of the semesters where you're going to be hired. But sometimes if you can be a little more strategic about it if you have contacts with adjunct assignments. That's a good way to see if you like the university setting. And so I did do some things, I had some contacts and but then people reached out to me and I just said yes. And then I said, hey, I'm interested in continuing. And so those were a couple things that just sort of, I wouldn't say they fell in my lap, because a lot of times you do stuff like they wouldn't have asked me if I hadn't have done something and had some relationships with people. One of them came about from a university that's in another state. It was all remote, and it was just somebody that I had collaborated with. I helped him with a research project during our graduate work because we went through the same doctoral program, and he reached out to me. So years later, that came back. So there's certain things that just sort of came up. But then there's other things where I had to be a little more strategic about it. How I did it specifically was that I was working on my doctoral program in special ed, and I was getting the director of special ed credential at the same time. Actually, I added the special ed credential later, which meant I could be a special ed administrator, because in my doctoral classes, I actually really liked some of the stuff that was more administrative. So it was sort of like an unintentional experiment where it was like, oh, I really like this. Maybe I'll add this other thing. But then once I knew I wanted to do that, I would have these class assignments, and I would always try to figure out a way that I could do something that was, number one, something that my administrators kind of needed to be done, that needed to be taken off of their plate, that I could do, that could be helpful in my district, so that I could do some different things that I wouldn't normally do in my job role, but that still kind of made sense. I like to say it wasn't outside the box. It was kind of on the edges of the box, where it was like, a little bit outside the norm, but not totally crazy. So I could still sell it to them. And so I was completing my course requirements. I was doing something helpful for my caseload, for my administrators, and also building up that portfolio of experience. So it was like, I always looked for ways that I could kill multiple birds with one stone and just lean into these opportunities that I was already pursuing. So that's one way that I did it. Sometimes I would have things that weren't for a class where I was just kind of like, I see a problem that needs to be fixed, and I'm going to go fix it, even though it's not technically my job. I like to think about, I'm trying to think of some specific, tools and resources that might be out there. In Seth Godin's book, Linchpin, he always kind of talks about how you can be the linchpin. You can always be that person who steps up and does things and is helpful and sort of goes above and beyond your role. And a lot of times those people who are linchpins then just, like they're really good at their job, but a lot of times they are the people who start to move up the ladder. So I would try to look for opportunities to do that where I was currently working. So those were some ways that I approached it. It was always a combination of just thinking about it, planting seeds, being open to things that came my way, looking for ways that I could be multifunctional in what I was doing, and just be a little bit more purposeful about the direction I was going with the stuff that I always had to do. But one of the things that it seems so obvious, and I say this to the clinicians that I am mentoring, if they want to be more persuasive and have more impact on the way things are done in their facilities, in their current position, and if they want to be seen as more of a leader and considered for something, in the future, just like be helpful. I know that's kind of obvious, but a lot of times if you're just like, what needs to be done? And let me figure out how I can tie that into something that is a skill that I have, rather than trying to like superimpose this idea of what you think your role should be.
What do you think gets in the way of people doing experiments though?
I think that sometimes one thing I know, which is just sort of an obvious thing, is just time and energy. A lot of times the idea of thinking about that does require you to create some space to be creative. And if you are really tired and just overwhelmed, it can be really hard to even get your brain to even think about that. And if you try to force it without giving yourself a little space to make it happen, you can get really stuck. It's like writer's block. But, again, writer's block is really just that you're not creating the space to allow yourself to go through that internal process that needs to happen. Because whenever we sit down to do something creative, like writing, for example, I would place this type of thing, this idea of planning and brainstorming and doing these micro experiments. It sounds scientific, but it's also an art, and you do need to give yourself that time and that space to think about it. And if you can't get into that mindset, then it's going to be really hard to do that. So that's actually why one of the first things that I am going to teach people in the program is just sort of this overview of this concept of service delivery. But then I start with productivity because it's not super sexy, but you have to just get that stuff out of the way to create space for the other stuff. So that's probably one big thing. And then I think the other thing is just that sometimes it can be hard to, like, if you've just been trained to look at something in a certain way, it does take you a little bit more work and some external facilitation from other people and, just some bouncing around of ideas in order for you to just train yourself to think a little bit differently about things. And then there's this whole idea of asking for permission, which happens sometimes in these clinical positions where you feel like you have to have someone just telling you what to do, and you have to wait for people to, tell you that you can do things. And it's just not true. I think that a lot of times, even when I mentor clinicians, it's like, oh, my administrator wants me to do it this way. And I'm like, do they really? Or like, did you just I always like to challenge that, because sometimes they're right. And, the person is really trying to micromanage them. But a lot of times it's like a lack of communication where it's just the administrator is busy. They are not thinking about things from your perspective. And sometimes if you take the time to open the dialogue, you realize that you're kind of more on the same page, and you can have a little bit more input, well, a lot more input than you really thought you could. It's a lot of times just a lack of communication and just not fully understanding, where everybody's coming from sometimes. So I always that.
I think there's another piece of this, and this pertains to like everybody, that we think that if we're going to do something, we have to do it like fully all in. Like if I'm going to try this, that means I'm going to in that direction, and committing to that direction is a big leap of faith, right? But what I love about the idea of these micro experiments is like their little toes in the water.
Yeah, that is a Oh, sorry. That is a huge thing. So in this field specifically, there are some adventurous types, but there are a lot who are, like, this isn't the entrepreneur mindset where it's like leap and the net will appear. I mean, some people think like that, but a lot of people care about security and they want career stability. They want to be able to explore without, doing something crazy. And so, that it's a little bit of a black or white thinking where it's like, I can't just do it a little bit. I have to, go all in. I know that sometimes people who are starting a private practice, like that's one of the mindset shifts that I've seen being taught, where it's like, you can kind of start up on the side. And this doesn't just apply to private practice. That's an obvious example, but there are a lot of other ways that you can do it outside that private practice model, where you can start to do these mini experiments, see what you like, and even generate some income too. A lot of these may not at first, but they can potentially.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to be like an entrepreneur or have an entrepreneurial, model that you're working towards. I think that you can innovate and you can experiment within your existing roles and within existing constraints, and, find that place for yourself. And I think like this has a lot to do with how you think about yourself and how you sort of show up as a person in your role. And this is a lot of like kind of what you're talking about in terms of developing internal leadership, right? And you sent me a quote today that just made me go, because I did the same thing for you. What was it? Like I'll paraphrase, but it was something like, what would people think if they knew how you thought about yourself?
It was, do you believe people would think differently about you if they knew how you talk to yourself? From my from another person who was a clinician and went outside the traditional career path. So kind of ironic, but
So let's unpack that.
Yeah. Oh man.
Because I think it's relevant to the conversations that you're having and and like the stuff that you are creating for this new program. It's so like different than what you have done in the past. And it really is digging into this shift in how we think about ourselves. Because everything now is focused on how we progress, how we grow, either inside our roles, outside our roles, into new versions of our roles, whatever that might be. And that's what this whole program, like what it's wrapped up in. And so a lot of that comes back to how we think about ourselves and how we talk about ourselves to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this has sort of been an ongoing thing my entire life. I was just thinking about my ice skating coach when I was like, grade school, who used to tell me, be nice to Karen. She was one of the only people who knew how to get me calm when I was, needed to be talked off the ledge, freaking out about something. So, I mean, I think there's a process, there's a learning curve, there's a period of discomfort. And I'm in there right now. So it's something new. It's something that everybody who will be going through this process will be working through. So I do think that it's I mean, I've always thought it was kind of woo woo, but I think it's true where you do have to think about your identity. It's not, actions and identity kind of go together. And there's this whole reciprocal thing where it's like, which one do you start with? Is it the chicken or the egg? And I think it can kind of go both ways. But I think really the whole concept of like being a leader to yourself, to others, that's a really big shift to make, because when you think like that, then you stop thinking that you have to be told to do something and that you have to be given permission to do something. You just, you find a way to make it happen. You trust yourself, because a lot of times people don't do it because they think, am I going to be doing something wrong? Am I going to get in trouble? But when you really trust your knowledge and your skills and yourself, I'm doing something that's helping people. So why would I, like, what is there to worry about, from an ethical standpoint?
Yeah. And I like, obviously nobody's, going to go off and break laws or,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. Well, compliance, that is a thing. That is definitely a thing that comes up with like professional licensure. And that is something that is very frustrating in entrepreneur groups when you're a therapist who has a licensure in a state and people are like, just do it this way. And you're like, I don't want to lose my license and all of this stuff. So that is another reason why I thought we need something specifically for people who understand education and healthcare and the clinical sphere.
Yeah. And like, we're kind of dancing around the issue, but like, let's go right to the heart of it. So
Yeah.
I actually think you do a really good job of recognizing and managing the effects of the way we think about ourselves, right? And if anybody could hear what goes on in my head, I'm like, that would be the worst marketing tool ever. So I don't think the goal is not to not have crappy thoughts, but the goal is to recognize what they are, recognize where they might come from, and decide what, if anything, we do about them, right?
Yeah.
And the internal dialogue, if there is misalignment between what you say to yourself and what you say to others, this is never going to sound authentic, right? You are never going to show up to people and make them believe in the things that you're trying to help them believe. So we don't get away from this, we're not trying to eliminate it, but we're trying to, over time, shift our own beliefs in ourselves by recognizing that they come from somewhere and what purpose they have for us, because most of the time they're trying to keep us safe, right?
Yeah.
And trying new things results in the same adrenaline rush in our body as like being chased by a lion, right? And so our body hasn't yet learned how to distinguish between the adrenaline rush from trying something new and that has ambiguity, and the adrenaline rush that comes from being unsafe.
Yeah.
Right? And so, because you do a pretty good job of this, what have you employed? Like, how do you think about that stuff that comes up where we're, that self-talk that may get in the way of you moving forward, especially in these experiments?
I really have to surround myself and with the right people and put myself in the right place, because I can do a lot of work independently, but I still sometimes can self-sabotage and get frustrated when, there's been a couple times with this specific project, I would start and I would stop. And with this program is one of the micro experiments. And I think that a lot of times I doubted myself because it wasn't quite fully clear and I just kept stopping. So maybe that was the right thing for me to do at the time because it wasn't fully working. And maybe it was right for me to build all these other things and do all these other things before maybe that was just part of the process. But yeah, I think it's really good to surround yourself with people who understand how to reframe that for you and keep you focused, which is why I reached out to you specifically, because I know that you are all about individualizing things and you are at the same time like not woo-woo, I mean, but at the same time you can still be, what's the word? You can think expansively without it just being total bullshit. I mean, to be honest, because some of this other stuff, it was like either super Debbie Downer or super fluffy, like follow your dreams, blah, 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 with like no specific strategies. And you really need this blend of being pragmatic and realistic and preparing, but also still being over here and allowing yourself to dream. It's sort of this weird paradox. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. A lot of people that sell services to help you with things like that don't know how to do it. So I think that sometimes you just have to, like, some of my mini experiments were hiring coaches and, consultants and taking courses and testing different approaches. And if, those were all mini experiments, where I built skills and learned a way to do things. And so some of it worked, some of it didn't. So I think that one of my, just the quest for knowledge and research is I would say one of my things that is
that's a huge strategy. Yeah, that's a huge motivator for you.
Yeah, it is. Just to always know and to always be learning about things. Because even though I may have, self-sabotaged or, gotten frustrated, the quest to always want to know more always would lead me, it did eventually lead me to the right places, the right people. And I do think that you have to just go like approach things and just think that the right system, the right person to support me or whatever, like they're there. I'm going to find them. It might not be this thing right now, but it's there. I'm going to find the thing or the person or the whoever. So,
and sometimes it's timing. Like 4 years ago, you and I were talking about, and dancing around some of this stuff, but it wasn't the right time, right? It wasn't the right time to move into this new phase.
And I kept coming back to it. And I guess sometimes maybe that's the process, some of your experiments, it might be like something can be a hell no, or something can be a not now,
Yes.
Sometimes that's how it is. I have a lot of things that are a not now right now that I'm like, ugh, can we get going so I can do this thing? Because I know that it's not like my podcast, which, again, I did direct some attention to it for a while, but then I had to kind of put it on autopilot so I could focus on this other thing. And I'm like, I want to work on this, but we're doing this now. So
it's also, this informs that, right? Like there's, I think that when you finally turn your attention to the podcast, it will be with a whole bunch of new information that, and it'll help refine it. Right. So we have a really, really, like, we all get ahead of ourselves really, really easily and really quickly. And that's the sort of the cautionary note with all the experimentation is like, you're gathering evidence and then you're going to put all of these things into an order that sort of feels right for you. And I'm the same way, like with my own business, this is my year of like moving into what's right. And I've been dancing around it for probably 7 or 8 years, maybe even. It was funny. I actually was talking to Natalie, so one of my best friends, and we talk every day. She knows everything about me. We talked every day for years, and I don't even remember why. I was telling her about like one of my earliest experiences in a job, which I haven't had a job in like 20 years. I don't even know what that's like anymore, but it was one of my first jobs. And when I started telling her about it, it was some story. I got like excited. Like I was like, I had that feeling again where I was just like, oh, oh my gosh, I love this. Because that in that role, I was put into like this director role really early on. I was quite young, and I worked for a company that was incubating companies, and we were building companies for sale. And I would put all of the pieces together. Like they just kind of gave me free reign. They were like, go do like make this happen. And these were multi-million dollar like investments, right? Building these businesses. And it was the most exciting, rewarding, fun, interesting, like passionate work I've ever done. And here I am 20 years later, yeah, maybe 20, 25 years later,
Yeah.
where I've come full circle to this place where I'm like, what I really love is incubating and building and like crafting these new companies with the intention of exits. And I'm like, oh, when I was talking to Natalie, I was like, oh, well, it's because that's where I started. And that's what I loved. And I ignored it for so long, right? I ignored it. It was like it sat dormant for 20 years. And then suddenly here we are, right? So these things, like they kind of sit dormant. And I think maybe if I had pursued it at the time, it wouldn't have been the right time because I needed to develop all this experience and all of this education and all of this stuff till now I'm actually in the position to know enough to be able to make that my thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so here like this is the process we go through. And the not right now is as good an answer as yes or no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about how we're going to build this in to the program.
Yeah. As far as the not right now and the exploration. So in the event that is going to lead people into the program and enroll them, we are taking them through a process of self-discovery. And then they're going to use that to figure out like, what skills they already have based on their discipline, based on their background, based on whatever their experiences are, whether it be based on their specific clinical background or whether it be just because of other experiences that they've had, other talents that they have, who they want to work with, how they want to work, considering all the factors, not just what they think is the way that they're supposed to go, but how they really want to work and really getting clear on that. Because I think that like you have to be open to things. You have to be open to possibilities that you don't know. You don't know if you're going to like it unless you try it. But if you don't have that clarity on like, this is how I like to work, it's really hard to prioritize and make decisions because sometimes like it is really hard to figure out and get things exactly the way that you envisioned it when you created this brainstorm self-discovery plan. And a lot of times that self-discovery is based on what you know now. And sometimes when you experiment, you realize that there might be other ways that you might like it. So there has to be that balance between the two things. So what I want to guide people through is using that, but then also creating this matrix and these options that they explore to kind of match it up to what they thought. And so it's really they're testing theories about what they think they might want, what they, where they want to go. And then, with this whole brainstorming process, identifying these micro experiments that they can do. And in the actual program itself, there are some specific tactics, there are some specific tools because this is about pediatric clinicians, there are certain topics that are relevant for all of them to be considering when they're thinking about how they can be of service. One of the things that I have a big suite of courses on is executive functioning, because that's one of those things that I see as like this umbrella that impacts a lot of clinical areas. So that's one lens that I want them to be thinking through as they're thinking about how they can be of service as a clinician. But again, they're able to kind of customize how that looks for them. And the whole concept of, as they're doing this exploration process, the concept of planning for service delivery rather than planning for therapy, because then you're thinking bigger picture about meeting the needs of kids on your caseload now and in your community, because that's what can kind of help this, the whole creative process of what can I actually do with my skills. And that's what can help you kind of think about more specific things that you could be doing to, offer a service, whether it be things that you could do as a micro experiment in your facility now to, for all the reasons that I mentioned. And then also whether it be things, actual services that you offer as like a self-employed person. So that's the concept of service delivery, the concept of exploration and micro experiments. And then the other things that are going to be layered in there, obviously we have tools for productivity, because you need to be able to create the space to make this happen. And then the other thing is that the focus on leadership and reform, because that's when you're thinking about how to actually deliver these services, you do have to think about how to be persuasive, how to build relationships, and how to sell yourself. So there's going to be a whole section on leadership and reform. And I actually haven't built that yet. That is what these roundtable discussions that I'm going to be creating are going to be about. And that's what's going to be the ongoing content. So what I have now are some of the core basics about service delivery, productivity, the executive functioning. And so those sections can be added and expanded on. The other thing that I have in there under service delivery is the concept of assets and leverage, because that's a big thing as far as just like creating tools for yourself to make these things happen. So those are sort of some of the core tenets and tools that I'm actually going to be teaching people to use as they apply whatever to their specific tactics. But the kind of the intro event is about the self-discovery and mapping out some of those possibilities. And then the program itself is expanding on that and giving people some specific tools and also a community to make that happen. And I will say, like, for a long time, I had this thing in my head, like, I like to fly solo. I don't need help. But I just, like I said, I wouldn't, if we were not working together, I don't even know. Like we talked about this yesterday. It's like, what would I be doing if I hadn't have like had somebody to talk me off the ledge and keep me going? And so just there has to be this blend of self-reflection, but also using other people, because a lot of times they can help you see your blind spots. And so that's why, that's why there's the community. That's why I'm offering this as a person who's gone through this process. And hopefully, again, we're creating the community because there are the other people with experiences that are going to come into the program as members as well. So,
I think that's really interesting. Like, I think that's such an interesting part of the whole design is like, I think that each of these clinicians are used to being around each other.
Yep.
But not across the disciplines, right? And I think there's so much to learn, and so much innovation that can happen, and so many like understandings that can develop and support that can develop through those relationships and through that communication.
Yeah. Speaking of going back to a passion that was lying dormant, being a self-employed person and not working on a team. Like when I was in the schools, the days that we would have brainstorming sessions with the team were my favorite days.
Yeah.
People think I'm crazy because I liked IEP meetings, not necessarily the paperwork, but I legitimately looked forward to IEP days because that's when we would have that group discussion and collaboration. And so I'm just itching to do that again.
Yeah, awesome. I can't wait. Okay, so what's on tap for the next week? Because we're inching towards your launch.
Yep.
We're inching towards the roundtable event, which I think is going to be really cool, but that's like pre-launch of the program. So what do you got going on?
So lots of copy, writing lots of emails. So I'm working on the emails that are going to be inviting people to the event, and I'm working on some of the tools and what I'm going to share in the event in the Clinical Leadership Mastermind Facebook group. Some people might be watching this live stream from that group. So there's that. And then I'm working on the follow-up emails that are going to happen after the event, just giving people additional information about the School of Clinical Leadership once the live event happens. So again, to clarify, the Clinical Leadership Roundtable is the free event that goes through the initial brainstorming, and then School of Clinical Leadership is the actual program where I'm going to be offering the services. So I'm working on the follow-up emails that are going to be leading people into that program who've participated in the roundtable that want more information.
Yeah.
And are ready to start mapping out their next career move. So that is what I'm working on. And a little bit with the Facebook ads, going back and forth with some messaging. That was kind of interesting, communicating with a copywriter through my Facebook ads person when I wasn't even clear on the message. So obviously the finished product was not good, which was, not their fault because I wasn't communicating clearly. And we actually, before I got on this call, I just approved some copy for an ad that was looking pretty good. So it helps to get clarity.
So we did. And it was a huge momentous shift because everything that came out of you after that was like night and day, right?
Yeah.
So if I said to you right now, Karen, what's the big promise for the program?
The big promise is for them to get clarity and a plan on mapping out what their next career move is and making that happen.
For who?
Them through all of the micro experiments to be able to craft that ideal dream career that they want and kind of go on that journey.
Except in order to do that, regardless of whether you're going to, find a leadership position in whatever your current role is, or whether you're going to go start up your own business, or whether you're going to have a private practice, or whether you're going to, whatever it's going to be, the program builds this foundation for you, builds this whole foundational understanding of like how to be successful in this world, whatever path you're choosing to go on, and how to really refine that vision for yourself. So regardless of which micro experiments you try and, which paths you try to go down, you're going to have this real foundational set of skills and ways of looking at the world that is going to help you regardless.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I think that's important. Okay. So next week, we're going to be even closer, very close.
Mm-hmm.
And the promotion will have started for that live event.
Yep, it will.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we hoping to have achieved by next week?
So by the end of next week, we'll have, obviously all the invites to go out, the ads will be going, and the follow-up emails and the follow-up invites and all of that, a good part of that will be done. So I will be working on onboarding, like figuring out, I do have a tentative plan about how I'm going to handle the first month, but working on potentially getting some guests and some other experts to leverage some other people's expertise. So that's where I hope to be at by the end of next week, is to have all of the stuff done and scheduled and written so that I can start to focus on outreach. I am really antsy to get going on that visibility plan. So
yeah, that's exciting. So that's totally such a huge part of this next phase for you, is really
Yeah.
like starting to build out those muscles, and like your collaboration in you, and like your, your relationship building and all of that.
Yeah. So basically we need the emails and like this, we need like the stuff done, the emails, the stuff that needs to go out to people, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The assets that you build when you're creating a new offer, all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Super good. I love this stuff. I love the progress that you've made and the journey that you've been on. And we will jump back on this live next week and be very close to that live event.
Yep. All right.
Okay. Well, we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.